Deep within the collective memory of our species, there exists the persistent ghost of a place. It is a haunting memory of a sanctuary, a walled garden where the air supposedly tasted of honey and the water flowed with the absolute purity of creation itself. We call it Eden, a name that has echoed through the dark corridors of time, surviving the collapse of Bronze Age empires and the rise of our modern digital civilizations. For most people today, it is nothing more than a comforting myth, a childhood story whispered to explain why the world is now so harsh, jagged, and unforgiving. But for the investigator, Eden is not a metaphor for lost innocence. It is a physical coordinate on this spinning planet, a lost piece of geography waiting to be reclaimed from the suffocating layers of dust and the crushing silence of the deep. He has spent his entire life consumed by this singular driving pursuit, fueled by the conviction that the book of Genesis is not merely a theological text of faith, but a coded map. To him, it is a cryptic guide left behind by our distant ancestors to lead us back to the literal cradle of humanity, a set of instructions hidden in plain sight. The weight of this mission is a heavy, unrelenting burden, one that he carries into the most remote and desolate corners of the globe. His office is a labyrinth of yellowed maps and high-resolution satellite imagery, a place where the ancient world and modern technology collide in a chaotic dance of paper and pixels. While others see only endless sand and broken stone, the investigator sees the faint, lingering scars of a forgotten landscape. He understands that the world's oldest story holds a historical accuracy that modern science often dismisses as mere poetic license or religious allegory. This is the lonely struggle of the seeker to stand precariously between the rigid, cold skepticism of the scientific community and the profound ancient truths of Scripture. The geologists point to shifting tectonic plates and the violent erosion of 10,000 years, arguing that the world has changed far too much to ever find a specific patch of land from a pre-cataclysmic era. Yet, the investigator remains entirely undeterred. He knows that the truth is often buried precisely beneath the things we take for granted, hidden by the very earth that once nurtured it. His journey began with a question that has haunted explorers for centuries. If the Tigris and the Euphrates are real rivers that still carve through the heart of the Middle East, why have the other two rivers mentioned in the ancient texts vanished? The Pishon and the Gihon are the missing limbs of a geographical body, and their absence suggests that our modern maps are fundamentally incomplete. The investigator has traveled through the sun-scorched valleys of Iraq and the rugged highlands of Turkey, looking for a sign, a whisper of the original paradise. He has spent nights under a canopy of desert stars, cross-referencing satellite data with crumbling Sumerian tablets that predated the written Bible by centuries. Every discovery, every small fragment of evidence feels like a faint pulse from a heart that stopped beating thousands of years ago. The stakes of this investigation could not be higher for the human story. To find the real Garden of Eden is to find the absolute point of origin for the entire human experience. It would prove once and for all that the stories we have told ourselves for generations are rooted in a physical reality, a historical moment when humanity lived in perfect harmony with the earth. This is more than an archaeological dig. It is the search for our true home, the place where we first opened our eyes and breathed the fresh air of a young world. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Recently, however, a massive breakthrough has shattered his expectations. Deep in the heart of a region long thought to be a barren wasteland, a mysterious archaeological discovery has surfaced that defies explanation. A site that contradicts every modern geographical model and points to a truth hidden for millennia, waiting to be reborn from the silent layers of ancient earth. The investigator leans over his desk, his eyes tracing the familiar ink of the second chapter of Genesis, as if he could pull the truth directly from the vellum. This is no mere religious meditation. It is a forensic analysis of a world that was lost before history even had a name to record it. The text is strikingly specific, detailing a singular river that flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 distinct heads. 2 of these names provide a comforting modern anchor: the Hiddekel, known to the modern world as the Tigris, and the Perat, which we recognize as the Euphrates. These great twin rivers of Mesopotamia have nourished the very cradle of civilization for thousands of years, their silt-laden waters witnessing the rise and fall of the greatest empires of man. Yet, for the investigator, these 2 rivers are merely the surviving fragments of a much larger, shattered puzzle. The true mystery lies in the other 2 names that seem to have been erased from the physical world: the Pishon and the Gihon. They are the ghost rivers of antiquity, names that linger in the ancient verses like echoes from a forgotten dimension, haunting the margins of every map ever drawn by human hands. This search for the missing veins of the earth creates a profound and constant scientific tension that isolates the investigator from his peers in the academic community. Geologists, equipped with advanced core samples and deep Earth seismic data, often view the biblical description with a mixture of pity and professional skepticism. They argue that the Middle Eastern landscape has been violently transformed by tectonic shifts, volcanic activity, and dramatic climate fluctuations over tens of thousands of years. To these scientists, the idea of a single river source dividing into 4 major, diverging systems in that specific region is a hydrological impossibility that contradicts the laws of gravity and terrain. They point to the massive, shifting plates of the Arabian Peninsula and the vast, scorched expanses of the desert as definitive proof that such a lush confluence never existed. But the investigator feels the emotional and spiritual weight of this search in the very marrow of his bones. He understands that searching for the Garden of Eden is like trying to locate a door that was first slammed shut and then wiped from existence. The ancient scripture tells of a garden guarded by the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned in every direction, a divine and terrifying barrier preventing a fallen humanity from ever returning to its original source. To the investigator, that flaming sword is not merely a celestial guardian. It is the brutal passage of time, the shifting of the Earth's crust, and the deliberate thick obscuration of historical truth. Every time he traces the winding paths of the Tigris and Euphrates on his high-definition digital screens, he senses the haunting presence of those 2 absent siblings. The Gihon is described as a river that winds through the entire land of Kush, while the Pishon is said to skirt the land of Havilah, a legendary place where the gold is exceptionally pure and where aromatic resin and precious onyx stones are found. These are not the vague, ethereal descriptions of a dreamscape. They are specific, grounded geographical markers meant to be followed. Yet, when one looks at a modern satellite map, there is only the vast, unforgiving void of the sand where these mighty rivers should be flowing. The skepticism of the geologists acts as its own kind of flaming sword, cutting through his theories with the cold, unyielding steel of empirical data. They tell him he is chasing shadows in a land that has been bone dry for an eternity. However, the investigator knows that the earth is like a parchment that can never be fully erased. It keeps secrets etched deep within its skin. He has spent countless, sleepless hours analyzing multispectral satellite imagery, training his eyes to look past the surface of the shifting dunes to see the ghosts of what lies beneath. If the rivers are truly gone, their skeletal footprints must remain impressed upon the bedrock. Late one night, while cross-referencing ancient topography with infrared scans of the Arabian Peninsula, he notices a subtle, winding shadow that makes his breath catch. Stretching across the heart of Saudi Arabia, hidden beneath the suffocating weight of the desert sand, is the unmistakable ghost of a massive, ancient riverbed. It is a fossilized channel, a dried-up vein that once surged with a massive volume of water flowing from the mountains of the west toward the head of the Persian Gulf. This is the Wadi al-Batin, a geological scar that modern science is only beginning to acknowledge. As he zooms in, the scale of the revelation becomes staggering. This wasn't just a seasonal creek, it was a powerful perennial river that once cut through the landscape exactly where the ancient texts suggested the Pishin should be. The discovery sends a jolt of adrenaline through his veins. The map is real. The rivers did not vanish into myth, they were simply buried by the earth they once blessed. The missing veins are reappearing, and the coordinates are finally beginning to align with a terrifying precision. The investigator stares at the infrared glow of the screen, realizing that the geography he is witnessing is a ghost of a world that existed before the shattering Great Cataclysm. In his mind, the story of the global flood is no longer just a myth, it is the ultimate geographical reset button, a moment in prehistory where the physical map of the world was violently rewritten. This was not a slow transition, but a traumatic rupture. He envisions the massive tectonic shifts that accompanied such an event, the Earth's crust buckling under the unfathomable weight of rising waters and internal pressure of a planet in upheaval. The paradise he seeks was not merely left behind. It was buried, drowned, and crushed by the very elements that once sustained it. This is the drama of an absolute loss. The original landscape, with its balanced ecosystems and its life-giving mountain source, was likely obliterated by the sediment of a world-ending deluge. To find the garden now, he must look through the scars left by this cataclysm. He turns his attention to the specific mention of the land of Havilah. The biblical text notes that it is a land where gold is found, and that the gold of that land is exceptionally good. This is not the language of a poet. It is the language of a surveyor. The investigator cross-references this with modern geological surveys. His research leads him to the cradle of gold, the Ma'ad Adh Dahab mine in Saudi Arabia. This site has been a source of high-purity gold for millennia. The presence of aromatic resin and onyx in this exact region further cements the geographical anchor. The land of Havilah is not a mythical kingdom. It is a tangible, mineral-rich province of the ancient world. This realization solidifies his identification of the Pishin River. If Havilah is the gold-rich region of the Arabian Peninsula, then the Pishin must be the dried-up riverbed he saw on the satellite scans, the Wadi al-Batin. Thousands of years ago, this was the Kuwait River, a mighty torrent that carried the runoff from the Hijaz Mountains across the desert, carving a deep canyon into the limestone before emptying into the Persian Gulf. Today, it is a fossilized vein, a silent witness to a time when the desert was a lush savanna. The investigator feels a chilling sense of awe. The Pishin was erased, not by a miracle, but by the shifting climate and the encroaching sands of a dying world. It is a river that died of thirst. Yet the Pishin is only one piece of the puzzle. The Gihon remains, said to wind through the entire land of ancient Kush. Traditionally, Kush is associated with Ethiopia, but the investigator suspects a much closer location, perhaps the Kassite region of southwestern Iran. He contemplates the sheer scale of violent environmental transformation. At the very end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted and sea levels surged, the low-lying plains where these four rivers converged were swallowed forever by the rising tides of the Indian Ocean. This was the moment the garden became a memory. The flaming sword blocking the path back to Eden was the mighty wall of water that finally created the entire modern Persian Gulf. The investigator is now not just looking at a map, he is looking at a graveyard. He realizes that humanity's collective memory of a lost home is an echo of this physical displacement. We were once children of a fertile valley, a geological sanctuary where water flowed in abundance. When that world was destroyed by water and time, we were cast out into a fractured planet. The scars of the cataclysm are written in the salt flats of the Gulf and the dry wadis of Arabia. Every step forward in his research is a step deeper into the trauma of our species' birth. He zooms out on his sophisticated digital map, looking north toward the rugged, towering peaks of the Armenian highlands, where the majestic Tigris and the Euphrates still flow. If the Pishon and Gihon led him to the drowned lowlands, perhaps the source of the mystery lies hidden where the water begins its journey, high in the mountains of Turkey. The investigator shifts his focus from the submerged secrets of the south toward the jagged, snow-capped giants of the Armenian highlands. If the four rivers were truly meant to share a single source, as the ancient scribes of Genesis insisted, then the headwaters of the Tigris and the Euphrates in modern Turkey represent the surviving witnesses to a primordial unity. He travels into the heart of the Taurus Mountains, where the air is thin and carries the scent of ancient cedar and cold stone. Here, the landscape is a fortress of granite and basalt, a stark contrast to the shifting sands of the Arabian Peninsula. This is a land of vertical extremes, where the geography feels old in a way that is almost heavy, pressing down on the senses with the weight of unrecorded millennia. The investigation leads him to the limestone plateau of Şanlıurfa, where the discovery of Göbekli Tepe has already shattered established timelines of human history. Standing amidst the massive T-shaped limestone pillars, the investigator feels a profound sense of vertigo. These structures were raised nearly 12,000 years ago, long before the wheel, pottery, or settled agriculture. He runs his hand over the intricate carvings of foxes and scorpions, wondering if this was not merely a temple, but a commemorative monument to a lost world. Some scholars suggest this site was the very birthplace of the Neolithic Revolution, the exact point where humanity transitioned from wandering gatherers to masters of the soil. In the biblical narrative, this transition is marked by the sweat of the brow. He asks himself if these stones are the silent guardians of the gate to Eden, marking the threshold where the wild sanctuary was traded for the labor of civilization. The search is not merely intellectual, it is a physical struggle against the harsh terrain and invisible walls of modern political borders. The investigator moves through regions where echoes of ancient conflicts still resonate, navigating through restricted zones and over peaks that have seen the rise and fall of countless empires. He's aware of the irony that the site of humanity's shared origin is now divided by barbed wire and military checkpoints. Nature, too, is an adversary. The winters are brutal, and the sudden, violent storms that roll off the mountains threaten to bury his progress in white silence. Yet every obstacle only sharpens his resolve. He is looking for a signature, a trace of the original balance that existed before the great cataclysm fractured the earth. He begins to notice a recurring motif in the regional iconography, the tree of life. From elaborate stone reliefs to delicate symbols, the image of a life-giving tree is omnipresent. In the Armenian highlands, this symbol is often depicted with roots delving into the subterranean abyss and branches reaching for the celestial heights. To the investigator, this is more than just art. It is a persistent, encoded memory of a specific botanical reality that once anchored the garden. He finds fragments of oral traditions and local myths that speak of a valley where every fruit was sweet and every leaf had the power to heal. This was a sanctuary of biological perfection that has long since withered under the harsh sun. While excavating the dusty archives of a small museum, the investigator comes across something that makes his pulse quicken. It is a fragmented clay tablet, recovered from an undocumented site near the headwaters of the Euphrates. The cuneiform script is archaic, dating back to a period when the memory of the early world was still fresh. As he deciphers the weathered incisions, a story of environmental tragedy begins to emerge. The tablet describes a lush, high-altitude valley, a place of boundless green, and waters that spoke with the voice of the gods. However, the narrative takes a chilling turn. It speaks of a sudden darkening sky and a transformation so swift it defied comprehension. The text laments that this paradise became a desert overnight, its fertile soil turning to dust and its rivers retreating into the deep earth. This is the missing link he has been seeking, a direct historical record of the geographical rupture. The suspense hangs heavy as he realizes the garden was not just a victim of a global flood, but of a localized catastrophe that left the land barren. The investigator stood on the deck of a specialized research vessel, the salt spray a sharp contrast to the dry mountain air of the Armenian highlands. While the mountains held the headwaters, the ancient texts insisted on a confluence, a place where the four rivers met and then parted. If the Tigris and Euphrates flowed south, and the fossilized Pishon and Gihon once flowed toward the same basin from the Arabian and Iranian lands, their meeting point could only be one place, the now submerged floor of the Persian Gulf. He looked out over the shimmering turquoise expanse, knowing that beneath this tranquil surface lay a landscape that had been the stage for humanity's most profound tragedy. The Gulf Oasis hypothesis was no longer just a theory. It was a firm geological necessity. 8,000 years ago, this entire basin was a lush, low-lying valley, protected from the sea and fed by the combined waters of the four great rivers. It was a verdant sanctuary, a biological hotspot teeming with life, while the rest of the world struggled with post-glacial instability. The investigator imagined the ancestors walking through these plains, beside waters that had not yet been turned to salt. It was a world of abundance, a literal garden isolated from the harshness of the expanding, unforgiving deserts. As he adjusted the sensitivity of the side-scan sonar, the investigator felt the heavy emotional weight of this search. This was not merely an academic exercise. It was an attempt to touch the source of a universal trauma. Every ancient culture carries a story of a great flood, a cataclysm that wiped away the old world. He realized that this collective memory was an echo of the moment the Indian Ocean finally and violently breached the Strait of Hormuz. The Great Cataclysm was not a single day of rain, but a relentless surge of rising tides that swallowed the valley until the garden was gone. The flaming sword was the white foam of the encroaching sea, a barrier that no human could cross to return to the home they had lost. The geologists on his team remained cautious, pointing to the shifting silts and thousands of years of sedimentation that likely buried any remains. They spoke of tectonic subsidence and natural cycles, attempting to strip the mystery of its spiritual skin. But the investigator saw a map of displacement. He traced the ancient winding river channels on the digital seabed models, watching as the phantom paths of the forgotten Pishon and the Gihon converged with the ancient beds of the Tigris and the Euphrates. The four veins of the earth met at a single, precise and undeniable point. This was the epicenter where the heart of the world once beat. The ship moved slowly, its heavy engines a low, constant hum against the deep silence of the sea. The sonar pings grew more frequent, sending back pulses of light that painted a ghostly image of the floor on his screens. At first, there was only the expected topography of sand waves, but then, as they neared the confluence, the patterns began to change. The investigator leaned closer, his breath hitching. These were not the random undulations of the current or chaotic piles of reef. He saw lines, long, straight, and intersecting at angles that nature rarely produces. He saw circular depressions, surrounded by raised embankments, partially filled with silt, but still distinct enough to cast shadows in the acoustic imagery. These were structures. They were the skeletal remains of a complex that did not belong on the sea floor, far from any known ancient coastline. The scale suggested a complex level of organization that predated the known civilizations of Sumer. The tension in the air was suddenly palpable as the sonar identified what appeared to be a series of concentric walls, now slumped and eroded by millennia, but still guarding the ancient silent secret. He stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his weary, searching and tired eyes. The revelation was unfolding. The garden was not a metaphor. It was a sunken kingdom, a physical space reclaimed by the abyss. The search had led him to this watery grave, where the foundations of memory were buried under 80 meters of water. He knew the next step would require a dangerous descent into the dark, cold pressure of the depths to witness what remained. The gate was no longer a myth. It was a coordinate, and he was standing right above it, ready to dive. The data was finally speaking in a single, unified voice, resonating through the cold corridors of the research ship. For years, the investigator had chased shadows across the parched deserts of the Arabian Peninsula and the frozen peaks of the Armenian highlands. Now, the intersection of theology, archaeology, and geology had formed a crystalline truth. The map in Genesis was not a symbolic poem. It was a set of coordinates written by survivors of a lost world. The fossilized riverbeds of the Pishon and Gihon and the sunken foundations on his sonar screens aligned perfectly with the ancient descriptions of a fertile valley that had turned to sea. Every piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, revealing a world that existed before recorded history. Yet, with this clarity came a heavy, crushing realization. He had spent his life looking for a gate, only to find it was locked by the laws of the universe. The earth had shifted, tectonic plates had ground against one another, and sea levels had risen by hundreds of feet. The Garden of Eden was not just hidden, it was fundamentally erased from the surface of the living world. This was the true meaning of the exile. It wasn't just an eviction from a lush orchard, it was the physical transformation of the planet. The garden was a different version of Earth, a delicate climatic pocket that existed before the great cataclysm reset the scales of geography and turned a paradise into a silent graveyard of silt and salt. This realization created a profound and agonizing tension within his mind. The geologists on his team saw only sediment and subsidence, viewing the data as a natural transition of the Holocene epoch. To them, the flaming sword was merely the thermal energy of a changing climate and the relentless, rising pressure of the Indian Ocean. But the investigator felt a deeper weight to the evidence. The exile was the psychological trauma of a species that once lived in harmony with an abundant environment, only to be cast into a world of seasonal extremes and scarcity. The transition from valley abundance to the backbreaking labor of early agriculture was the physical manifestation of the ancient curse. We didn't just leave a place. We lost the version of the world that allowed us to be at peace. He returned to the maps, his hands trembling as he laid the modern bathymetric charts over his model of the ancient landscape. He searched for the precise point where the four veins of the earth met. In the sacred text, a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into four heads. He traced the ghost lines back through time, the Pishon from the west, the Gihon from the east, and the Tigris and Euphrates from the north. They all converged in a specific shallow basin 60 miles off the coast of modern Kuwait. submerged under 80 meters of water. This was the epicenter. This was the sanctuary where the four rivers once united their currents into a single life-giving pulse that sustained humanity's dawn. As he stared at the flickering coordinates, the climax of his search finally arrived. This wasn't just any valley. Geologically, this specific spot was a refugium, a sanctuary where life flourished with unnatural intensity while the rest of the world was a frozen or arid wasteland. The unique confluence of these four water systems created a microbiosphere of unparalleled richness. It was here, in this geological womb, that the seeds of civilization were sown. The discovery wasn't just about finding old walls. It was about identifying the physical engine of human progress. The garden was a place of such profound resource density that it allowed the human mind to move beyond survival and into the realm of creation and society. He looked at the sonar image one last time. The concentric walls weren't random. They appeared to be a sophisticated system of water management that predated Sumer by thousands of years. The garden had been a managed paradise, a testament to a human nature synergy since forgotten. But as the tides rose and the great cataclysm began, the inhabitants fled, carrying the memory of this perfection into a harsh world. The Guardian was not a literal angel, but the insurmountable force of time and a changing world, ensuring no human could ever return. He stood at the edge of the abyss, looking at the spot where the story of humanity began, a place now guarded by the weight of the sea. The investigator stood silently on the deck as the research vessel turned its prow toward the distant horizon, leaving the coordinates of the epicenter behind. The map was finally complete, a sprawling tapestry of data that bridged thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years. It stretched from the high, mist-shrouded peaks of the Armenian highlands, where the Tigris and Euphrates still carved their paths through ancient stone, all the way down to the sun-drenched silence of the Persian Gulf floor. He could see it clearly now, the great alignment of the four veins of the earth. The Pishon, once a mighty river crossing the Arabian sands, and the Gihon, winding through the mountains of the east, had met here, in this sunken valley, to create the most fertile sanctuary the world had ever known. This was the geography of Genesis, a physical blueprint surviving time. The geologists on board were already busy cataloging the seismic data, their minds focused on the mechanics of subsidence and the chemistry of the sediment. To them, the search was over because the physical location had been found and explained by natural cycles. But for the investigator, the completion of the map brought a different kind of resolution. He realized that humanity's obsession with Eden was never truly about a specific plot of land. The reason we are destined to keep searching for this lost paradise is because the memory of it is etched into our collective soul. It is a haunting reminder of a time before the struggle, before the great cataclysm forced us to trade abundance for toil. We seek Eden because we are seeking ourselves before we were broken by the world's harsh, unpredictable shifts. This was the true philosophical conclusion of his quest. The garden was a physical reality, but its disappearance served a larger purpose in the human narrative. It became the symbol of everything we lost and everything we strive to regain. The exile was not a punishment, but the inevitable consequence of a planet in constant transition. As the investigator watched the waves break against the hull, he felt a sense of redemption that had nothing to do with fame. He found paradise not in the mud of the sea floor, but in the understanding of our shared origins. We all come from the same sanctuary, a single point of light in the history of the Ice Age, and that realization offered a bridge across the divides of culture. It was the common ground we had forgotten. However, this discovery carried a heavy responsibility. If the original garden was a delicate microbiosphere that allowed humanity to thrive, then the entire Earth was now our shared responsibility, the only garden we have left. The investigator looked at the coastlines, thinking of how much of the world was turning back into the deserts his ancestors had fled. The message of his research was clear. We cannot return to the Eden of the past, for it is guarded by the weight of the oceans. But we can protect the beauty of the world we currently inhabit. We are the stewards of the new garden, and the lessons of the first one, its fragility and its loss, must guide our hands as we shape our future. As the sun began to set, casting a golden path across the water, the investigator opened his worn notebook one last time. He looked at the sketches of the Tree of Life found on the ancient tablets from the mountains of Turkey, recorded by the nameless authors. While the geography was mapped, one lingering question remained. If the garden was real, then the symbols within it were based on something tangible. Somewhere, perhaps hidden in a deep mountain fold of the Armenian highlands, or buried under volcanic ash near Ararat, the physical ancestor of that legendary tree might still exist. It would be a silent witness to the dawn of man, its roots tangled in secrets, waiting for the next seeker to look. The map was finished, but the mystery of the living heart of Eden remained, a quiet whisper in the leaves, waiting for the wind to blow once more and reveal what the tides and the sands have yet to fully surrender to the light of the modern world.